Episode 67, 3 Apartment Horror Stories. Scarlett is a young wife whose husband, Will, works the graveyard shift. Although nights can feel slightly lonely staying in an apartment on the 10th floor, Scarlett's nights were more bearable whilst having the company of their 4-year-old son, Aaron. Scarlett and Aaron would spend the nights together watching TV, chatting, playing with Aaron's toys in their apartment, before eventually heading for bed. It had been ongoing for a couple of years now, and Scarlett knew that their family had to temporarily endure Will's night shifts until he eventually gets a new office job somewhere else. And over time, Scarlett had gotten used to being alone with her son at night, but little did Scarlett know that one fateful night would cause the sense of comfort taken away from her. So, it was 9 p.m. as usual, and Scarlett was seated in the living room with Aaron watching TV. As it usually had been the case, Scarlett knew that Aaron would soon get sleepy. However, that night, Aaron was more active than usual. While watching TV, Aaron jumped and sang. Scarlett then said, "Darling, it's late already. We have to go to bed soon, okay?" Aaron then turned to Scarlett and said, "Okay, Mommy, but I'm not tired yet. Can we stay up a little later tonight?" Scarlett then smiled and said, "Okay, dear, just for tonight, okay?" Scarlett and Aaron continued watching TV and spending more time together. It was now about 11 p.m., and Aaron was finally sleepy. Scarlett turned off the TV in the living room before heading to the kitchen to turn off the kitchen lights, while Aaron stood in the living room waiting for Scarlett. From the kitchen, Scarlett walked back to the living room to turn off the living room lights. The living room was now almost completely dark, and the only source of light was coming from the bedroom. And as someone who was not too fond of the dark, Scarlett quickly pulled Aaron's hand to bring him into the brightly lit room. But as Scarlett was pulling Aaron's hand, she felt the resistance from Aaron. Scarlett turned to look at Aaron and saw that Aaron was just standing still while looking out the window. While Scarlett was still looking at Aaron, Aaron suddenly pointed towards the living room window and asked, "Mommy, why is Grandma flying outside our window and smiling at me?" Scarlett immediately felt goosebumps at the back of her neck and forearms. Scarlett didn't even glance towards the window as she knew what Aaron had seen outside the window. Scarlett knew that there was no way anyone could be standing outside her window of her apartment that was on the 10th floor. So Scarlett just pulled Aaron's hand and said with a shaky voice, "Okay, let's go to the room, Aaron." Aaron followed Scarlett into the room and Scarlett closed the door. Scarlett turned on the bedroom TV, which she rarely ever turns on, along with the lamp lights, just to add brightness to the room. Thankfully for Scarlett and Aaron, they were never bothered again that night, and that was the first and only time Scarlett and Aaron came across a supernatural spirit. A spirit who was probably just passing by and was just fond of Aaron. Sandra had just recently given birth to her newborn son named Jaden. And unfortunately for her husband Sam had to go for a 2-week work trip. Worried that Sandra and Jaden would be alone, Sandra's parents wanted her to come over to their home until Sam returned. But Sandra loved her new apartment and insisted on staying at her own place instead. For the first couple of days, everything was fine. Sandra's daily routine would involve her waking up early to start caring for her baby and finish her house chores before spending the rest of the day with her baby. Every now and then, family members and friends would come over in the evenings to pay a visit, but in the nighttime, Sandra would be alone with Jaden. So one night, there were some religious processes near Sandra's place involving burning rituals. As Sandra was walking from the kitchen and headed to the bedroom to check on her son, Sandra saw a piece of the ashes fly into the window and fall right into Jaden's cradle. Sandra closed the window to prevent more ashes from coming in, before intending to pick up the ash that was in Jaden's cradle. But While walking to Jaden's cradle, Sandra saw Jaden pick up the piece of ash and put it in his mouth. Sandra hurriedly walked towards Jaden, afraid that he might choke on it. But when Sandra opened Jaden's mouth, she saw that the ashes had already dissolved. So Sandra carried Jaden into the kitchen and towards the kitchen sink. Sandra then washed Jaden's mouth to clear the remains of the ashes. Once done, Sandra put Jaden back into the cradle, and that was when Sandra saw the expressions on Jaden's face. Jaden's mouth just stayed wide open, and his eyes stared straight towards the ceiling. Sandra tapped Jaden a few times and dabbed some water over Jaden's face, but there was no response. Jaden's mouth was still wide open. As a new mom, Sandra became easily panicked. Sandra then immediately called her mom and said, "Mom, can you and Dad please come over quick?" Sandra's mom then said, "Why? What's wrong, dear?" "I think there's something wrong with Jaden. Can you come now, please? I'm not sure what to do," said Sandra. "Okay, dear, we'll be there in a short while. Stay calm, okay?" said Sandra's mom. Sandra put down her phone and turned to look at Jaden again. Sandra noticed that Jaden began growling before humming, which sounded like it came from a grown man. Sandra got even more worried as she picked Jaden up and carried him around, unsure of what else to do. Soon enough, the doorbell rang. Sandra rushed to the door, and it was her parents. Sandra opened the door, and once her parents entered, Sandra's dad then said, "Okay, dear, what happened earlier?" Sandra then told her parents about the piece of ash that Jaden put in his mouth. Without asking any more questions, Sandra's dad immediately called for his friend Larry, who had experience in dealing with the supernatural. And within a tense half hour of waiting, Larry finally arrived. A ritual was done as Larry poured spiritual water over Jaden and rubbed his back for a few minutes while praying. Eventually, Jaden began coughing and vomited murky water. And within a few seconds, Jaden seemed to regain his consciousness, blinked his eyes, and began crying. Larry then said, "Okay, Jaden is all good now. Be very careful during this period, where there are many burning rituals carried out. The ashes may seem harmless, but if swallowed like that, it can spiritually cause so much harm to even an adult. What's more, a fragile newborn like Jaden. So be sure to close your windows during this period." It was indeed a frightening experience for Sandra. She did think if Jaden was possibly just merely choking. But if so, why was Jaden growling and humming like a grown man? Jordan and his wife Kayla and their newborn son named Landon had just moved into their rented apartment. For the first couple of days, everything was fine. On the third night, while Jordan doing his work in the study room and Kayla was ironing clothes in their bedroom, they could hear Landon in the living room playing with his cactus toy while in his baby crib. The toy was something that would light up and repeat the sounds that it detects. So when Landon would laugh, the toy would light up and respond in laughter as well. Everything seemed fine, and when it was time to head to bed, Jordan carried Landon by his crib into the bedroom. But later that night, Jordan was suddenly woken up by laughter coming from the cactus toy that was still in Landon's baby crib. Jordan thought, "How is that possible? All of us are asleep and no one's making any sound." Jordan sat up and was startled when the toy started laughing again. Jordan thought that the toy was possibly spoiled. So, as not to wake Kayla and Landon up, Jordan took out the batteries from the toy, placed the toy on the room's TV console, and went back to bed. But as Jordan was trying to fall asleep, he got woken up from the toy's laughters again. Jordan was confused as he picked up the toy and looked to see if there was any other power source, but there was none. Suddenly, the toy said, "Welcome to your new home." It laughed, and Jordan immediately felt that something wasn't right. The toy then said, "Don't worry, I like playing with Landon," before it continued laughing again. Jordan immediately knew something was off, so Jordan mounted the courage and brought it out to the living room. Jordan then called his uncle Tom to see if it was indeed a supernatural matter. After calling Tom 5 times, he eventually picked up his call. And whilst still partially asleep, Tom said that he would be there soon. And thankfully, Tom stayed nearby, so in 30 minutes, he eventually arrived. Tom saw the toy, and that was when he explained. "It's not the toy that's the problem, Jordan. It's this apartment. It holds a child's spirit who, in the distant past, was tortured by her babysitter and eventually succumbed to her injuries." Tom sat down in the living room and prayed quietly, as he knew that Kayla and Landon were asleep in the room. So for almost 15 minutes, Tom prayed while closing his eyes. Jordan just sat there beside his uncle, and soon later, Tom opened his eyes and said, "Okay, little girl, it's time you leave. You don't want to scare the family, right?" Tom continued praying for 10 more minutes before he eventually said, "Okay, Jordan, it's done, but to be safe, I'm going to take the toy away. The little girl may come back because it's attached to this toy." Jordan agreed, and his uncle gave a final advice. "You're lucky this time, Jordan. A more evil spirit wouldn't have left this home so easily. Be careful next time before moving into a home. Try to find out from the neighbors first if possible. Or just call me. I'll tell you if the place is okay."